We've seen a lot of really crazy things happen in this past year.
We try to figure out, well, it looks now like the Capitol Police.
Yeah. Kobe Bryant has been killed.
Store shelves nationwide are dwindling.
We've seen a lot of pain and suffering.
Declare the outbreak an international public health emergency.
We've seen some blatantly evil things.
Violence. At least 16 people are dead after a gunman overthrew several Nova Scotia communities.
What ended with George Floyd's death began like this.
George Floyd's death sparking protests across the country.
But we've also seen a lot of really good things too. How do we as Jesus followers respond to some of the ideas and events that have happened within our culture in this past season?
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Where do we align ourselves with what our culture is saying and doing? And where does following Jesus offer us an alternative, uncultured pathway? We're going to be wrestling with some tough topics and questions, but I truly believe that these are conversations we need and should have. This is Uncultured. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Youth Online. My name is Brad, and I'm so glad that you guys have tuned in tonight. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever bought something that was incredibly expensive, but also so worth buying it? Well, maybe it was a new pair of shoes, or your iPhone, or a tablet, or something else. Maybe even your post-secondary education, something that you needed to save up for. It's very costly, but so worth it. For me, one of those things is this sucker right here. This is my 200 to 500 millimeter telephoto lens that I use for my wildlife photography. And yes, photography is not very nice on your wallet. And I am so glad that I paid the money that I paid to get this sucker right here, because it takes some pretty spicy images. There are some things in life that are pretty costly, but oh man, are they so worth paying for. Keep that in the back of your mind for a little bit later. Tonight we're opening up a new series. It is called Uncultured, and is how we as Christ followers are to respond with some of the things that we've seen in our world recently. Some of it's been great, some of it's been not so great. How do we follow Jesus in light of these things? We're going to be looking at some really tough topics, including things like racism, sex and dating, tolerance, individualism, and a lot more. But before we look at those things specifically, we need to take a broader look at what it means to have a Jesus-centered worldview. Basically, WWJD. What would Jesus do, think, or say in response to some of these things that we have seen this year? All right, story time. When I was in grade 10, I remember going to a classic youth conference where you've got youth from all over North America all coming together for a weekend of like amazing worship and music and all these incredible guest speakers that are super inspirational. It was in Detroit and it packed out Ford Field right to the brim. And I remember on the Saturday night, the worship leader did, your classic altar call at this youth conference. Basically he said something along the lines of, hey, if you want to give your life to Jesus, come on down to the front. We're going to have someone pray over you, and you can receive the free gift of God and spend eternity in heaven. And then he said something that I will never forget. He said, and it doesn't cost you anything. Okay? So kids, of course, start pouring down to the front of the auditorium to give their lives to Jesus, which was wonderful, and yet I had this little red flag going up in the back of my mind. Why? Well, because I was thinking, do these kids really understand what they're doing? Do they understand that following Jesus is way more than just a getting into heaven free stamp and then going and living your life however they want? Do they know that adding the Christian checkbox to their life doesn't automatically or suddenly make their lives perfect or make them a good person or exempt them from any future struggles or troubles? And do they know that being a Jesus follower is a way harder calling than to not? Tonight we are beginning our series talking about the cost of following Jesus. And yes, there is indeed a cost. But it's one of those things that I believe is truly worth the price. Now, most people out there, whether you're a Christian or not, tend to think of Jesus as a pretty cool guy, right? Positive light. he taught a whole bunch of really, really good things. He was a good teacher, good morality. He taught some new ideas about spirituality and God. But most people tend to draw the line at Jesus actually being God, which is something he said. So we've got to keep that in mind. And maybe even for us as Christians, we've bought into that lie that as soon as we follow Jesus, our life is just perfect, right? Like all of a sudden you're the captain of the football team. You've got good grades. You get a hot boyfriend or girlfriend, a perfect family life, a successful career, all of those things. But interestingly, Jesus never promised any of that. In fact, here is what he said. He said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will save it. I believe a lot of the evil things we've seen in this past year has been a direct result of people trying to pursue themselves and their own wants and desires. And it's left us broken and empty and unsatisfied and divided. When it comes down to it, it's all rooted in pride. We naturally are going to think about ourselves and our needs first and foremost. Now, Jesus knows this, okay? And so he is calling us to something greater than ourselves by saying, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And in doing this, you won't just lose your life, you will actually save it. Why? Because there is a greater reward to come. Sacrifice now, benefit later. That is the hope we have in following Jesus. The best is always yet to come. So I want to unpack that passage a little bit more. There are basically 3 parts to this big instruction. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. We're going to take a closer look at each of those 3 things. So, number 1, deny yourself. Let's start there. This is counterintuitive to basically everything that our world would tell us to do. Our culture, our friends, our family, maybe even our own hearts and minds will tell us, no, we're supposed to find ourselves, right? Follow your dreams. Figure out who you are. You are the greatest good. You are the center of attention. You go do what's most important to you. Now consider, if the naturalist or atheist worldview, the idea that we are indeed an accident, that there's no God, that there's no meaning or purpose in life, if that is true, then, well, logically, by all means, that makes total sense, right? If there's no purpose, go do what makes you happy. YOLO, am I right? Right? This is it, guys. So go compile as much treasure, money, possessions, women, power, status, and pleasure as you could want. But what if that's not the case? What if that worldview isn't true? 81% of our young people today, that's millennials and Gen Z, would say that getting rich is their number 1 goal in life. Guess what the number 2 goal is? Get famous. About 51% of them would say that is their number 2 goal. That is as shallow as it gets, folks. Get rich and famous. Canadian actor Jim Carrey actually said this. He said, I wish everyone could get rich and famous and everything they ever dreamed of so that they could see that that's not the answer. Guys, no amount of money or nicer clothing or a better job or more followers, a bigger house, more likes is ever going to give us full satisfaction. Jesus knows that if we simply follow our heart's desires, that we're going to get to a place that eventually is just going to leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled. You want to have identity or purpose or value? Guess what? None of those things are going to give it to you. So what does satisfy us then? What does give us meaning, purpose, and identity? Well, Jesus does. In fact, he said this, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. That's John 6:34. Guys, the fact that Jesus loves you so much that he thought you were worth dying for is what we should base our identity and our purpose on. That's what gives our lives meaning. He's saying, guys, my love is more than enough for you, and that will never change. So base your life on that fact, not on your own heart's desires or this world's idea of what is good for you, because those change all the time. Guys, when we deny ourselves, we empty out our hearts of all of those things that are meaningless, that don't really matter, and we allow room for Jesus to come and fulfill us. All right, so number 2, take up your cross. What does it mean to take up your cross daily? Now, the cross was an execution tool used by the Romans to basically scare any enemies of the state into submission. It was a brutal, slow, and painful death, and they would often mount crosses along the side of roads to scare people into following their government. If we are to take up our cross, we are being called to put to death or cancel, destroy anything within us that makes us think that life is all about us. That means that we have to completely let go of any sin that holds on to our life. And remember, sin is simply anything that falls outside of God's plan for you and I. So if we're to take up our cross, it means we have to let our lives be shaped by it. Weirdly, it means that we are to live as if we're already dead. Because if we're living as if we're already dead, what do we have to fear? If you're living like you're already dead, there is nothing in this world that is any value to you. If I'm already dead and you're already dead, then living for ourselves has no gain or purpose. That gives us space to focus our lives on others instead of us. The Apostle Paul once said this, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." If we're taking up our crosses to follow Jesus, it means we're giving up the idols of comfort and safety. Now, according to the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, there have been more than 70 million Christian martyrs in the last 2,000 years. More than half of those died within the 20th century under communist and fascist regimes. And it's estimated that about 2 million Christians have died just in the past 2 decades alone. And yes, I know there's also been a lot of non-Christian martyrs out there, sometimes killed at the hands of Christians, and there's also Christians who have been killed by other Christians. It's all messed up, it's all wrong. But if those martyrs live their lives as if they were already dead, they have nothing to fear. Because they know that, hey, if I die, I get to go and be with Jesus. What could be better? And I know that it sounds terrifying to think that we might die for the cause of Christ. I know, and it is. But the reality is, guys, for most of us in the West, our churches aren't really being persecuted in the same way they are around the world. That's just a reality. However, this might mean that we are indeed social outcasts. Not everyone is going to like us. Jesus warned us of this. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever wants to lose their life will save it. When we follow Jesus, we inherit the life to come for eternity and life to the fullest right here and now, even though we may face trials and suffering here in this world. All right, so we've got deny yourself, take up your cross. The third thing is follow me. You know what's really cool about following Jesus? Jesus. You know what you get when you follow Jesus? You get Jesus. You literally get a loving relationship with God himself. What is better than that? In fact, denying yourself and taking up your cross is next to impossible if we don't love Jesus. In fact, it's next to impossible if we don't believe that he's truly the Son of God. Why? Because giving up all of your desires in pursuit of the good life, as shallow as we found that to be, is going to be so difficult unless there is something better to replace it. And that's Jesus. So let me ask you, do you truly love Jesus? Do you delight in being in his presence? Do you eagerly look forward to spending time with him the same way you might be giddy and excited about being in the same room as the person you have a crush on? Do you love Jesus? Because Jesus isn't just our Savior, he is the greatest treasure that we will ever discover. So if we want to follow him, I actually think that's one of the most important pieces to this command. Why? Well, because right belief isn't enough. In fact, James, the brother of Jesus, once said this. He said, "Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds." You believe that there is one God. Good for you! Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. Basically, he's saying it's not enough to just have right beliefs. If you don't show how believing in Jesus has transformed your life, you are no better than the demons. Oof, Brad, what are you saying to me, man? Like, hey, I didn't say it. James did. He's brother of Jesus. Go blame him. What it comes down to is obedience through action. That means living in light of Jesus' example. In fact, Jesus warns us that there are going to be people out there who call him Lord, but that don't actually follow him, and they're not actually going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. He says this in Matthew 7. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. That's heavy, Jesus. Why are we doing all these really hard passages today? This is meaty, but you know what? It's a good thing to look at. Okay, so if we're called to follow him, what do? Well, 1 John 4:19 says, we love because he first loved us, which means that we are to love others in the same way that Jesus has shown us love. And how did he show us love? He died on the cross. He gave up everything for you and I so that we could have life. It was a sacrificial, unconditional type of love that we are called to demonstrate to those around us as well. Biblical love is one of the other topics we're going to look at in this series. Is all about submission. It's about giving it up for someone else, as described in Ephesians 5. Therefore, with everything that we do, with any subject that we could look at in our culture, we are to approach it with a Jesus-first, sacrificial love kind of perspective that puts aside our own wants and selfishness and desires and agendas so that someone else might benefit in our place. When we do this, we actually show Jesus how much we truly love him. In fact, if I were to just use my imagination and look back on this crazy year, I wonder, where might Jesus have been in the year 2020? Where would he have been? What would he have been doing had he been here physically present doing his ministry in this past year? Perhaps he would have been on the front lines, wearing full PPE to heal the sick and encourage those who have been putting in countless overtime hours during the pandemic. Perhaps he'd be condemning those who have hoarded wealth for their own benefit while so many people have been laid off and who have struggled to be able to provide for their families. Perhaps he'd be wrapping his arms around the loved ones of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, or Daunte Wright, who have lost their lives because of police brutality, racism, and hatred. Perhaps he'd be doing porch visits, grocery store trips, or making meals for the elderly who have been shut off from society because of the pandemic. Perhaps he'd be calling out the religious elite who have made their own agenda and safety and culture the priority over the call to love the orphans and widows in their distress simply because they have a different skin color or a different political belief or are gay or transgender. And perhaps he'd be hugging the 600 plus Mexican children still separated from their parents at the Mexico-US border. And perhaps he'd be helping them reunite with their families. That hypothetical list certainly isn't exhaustive, but perhaps it gives us a bit of a sense of where we as Jesus followers may need to follow his example in our world today. In fact, we don't do a lot of those things simply because they cost us. But perhaps this is one of those situations where the cost is worth it. So, to wrap things up, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. It's a huge calling. It costs us our entire life. That is the cost of following Jesus. The price is so worth it. Guys, I know this through personal experience because I think back to all of those times where I've actually followed in Jesus' example by going on a missions trip to a third world country or even just something as simple as serving other people here at our church. You give of your own time and energy and you walk out of those situations feeling so good because you know that you haven't just thought of yourself for a couple hours or even a couple weeks, but you've actually done something for the benefit of somebody else. Do you want to be part of something greater than yourself? Live like Jesus. Do you still think that Jesus was just a good teacher? That he was just a good guy who taught some good morals? Well, if you do, then you're going to have to weigh in some of these things that he said, like giving up your entire life to follow him. This is a vast and difficult and sacrificial calling that is way harder than not following him. It goes beyond just being a good person, going to church and trying not to cuss. It's about pursuing Jesus, living sacrificially, and acknowledging the cost. Being a Christian is not easy, but it is so worth it to live a life that loves others more than ourselves. So, as we move into this series and we take a look at some of these big, tough topics within our culture in this past year, we're going to tackle everything from a Jesus-centered perspective. Everything we will look at will come from the perspective and motive of giving up our own selfish ambitions and desires, and instead puts priority on loving Jesus and loving others. It is Jesus first, me second. Jesus first, you second. This is the lens that we are going to use to help us understand what's going on in our culture. It will help us navigate the societal norms both now and in the future with a godly perspective. When we look at these things through an earthly perspective, our answers may be one thing. But when we look at these things through a godly perspective, everything changes. When we start from a place of denying ourselves, taking up our cross, following Jesus, we can more clearly navigate things like racism, tolerance, sex, human rights, and so much more. Why? Because we trust that Jesus knows what's best for us. So, I hope that this series prompts you, maybe your friends, your family, your small groups, to dive into some of these more difficult conversations. I think they are so worth having. So I hope that you can go from here now, hang out with your small group, be honest, be real, be vulnerable, and take a look at some of these things that we've been talking about. So enjoy your time together, and we will see you guys next Friday. Okay, I'm recording here.
Okay, we're saying this one to each other.
Okay, singing to each other, y'all.
That's fun. Let me adjust my jeans.
This is Awake My Soul, take one and done. One and done.
I love to hear. It's the sound of the Savior's robe as he walks into the room where people pray, where we hear praises, he hears faith. There is a sound I love to hear. It's the sound of the Savior's robes as he walks into the room where people pray, where we hear worship, he hears faith. Oh, wake my soul and sing his praise aloud, sing his praise aloud. Oh, wake my soul and sing his praise aloud, sing his praise aloud. That changes things, the sound of his people on their knees. Oh, wake up, you slumbering, it's time to worship him. Wake my soul and sing his praise aloud, sing his praise aloud. My soul and sing his praise aloud, sing his praise aloud. And when he moves and when we pray, where stood a wall now stands a way, where every promise is amen. And when he moves, make no mistake, the bowels of hell begin to shake. All hail oh, let the King of Glory enter in. Hey, oh, fall down on your knees and worship Him. Hey, oh, let the praise rise up, don't hold it in. Oh, wake my soul and sing, sing His praise aloud, sing His praise aloud. Oh, wake my soul and sing, sing His praise aloud, sing His praise aloud. And when He moves, and when we pray, where stood a wall now stands away, where every promise is amen. And when He moves, make no mistake, the bowels of hell begin to shake. All hail the Lord, all hail the King. Hey, oh, oh, let the King of Glory enter in. Hey, oh, fall down on your knees and worship Him. Hey, oh, let the praise rise up, don't hold it in. Oh, wake my soul and sing, sing His praise aloud, sing His praise aloud. Oh, wake my soul and sing, sing His praise aloud, sing His praise aloud.
Yeah.
That was so much fun.
Let's do that again.
Thanks. Well, you guys, thanks so much for joining us for our Uncultured series tonight. We recognize that these are some pretty heavy and big topics, and so we don't want to just give you guys this fire hose of information and not give you a chance to join in the conversation. So if you have questions, we want to hear them. Feel free to write down in the comments below any questions you might have about these topics. We're also going to have on our social media, on Instagram, Dana is going to post in our stories a place for you to ask questions. And then every week, I'm going to be filming myself trying to answer these questions as best that I can. I hope that this series sparks some good conversations for you and your small group, maybe with your friends, your family, and I hope that it brings you closer to Jesus and helps you understand what it means to follow Jesus in the midst of this. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We love you guys, and we will see you again next Friday. Have an amazing week. Would you say that 81%... Oh, what'd you say?
Would you say that?
Would you say that? Would you say 81%?
Hey.
All right. Well.
Whoa.
He said, whoever wants to be my disciple must...
Got that one.
Yep.
Hey.
Ding, 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 ding. Oh, yeah. Okay. Down in the comments below. Can't wait to hear from you guys, and we hope that these topics give you guys a sense of... I don't know where I'm going with that. Let's try it again.
Guys. Guys. You say guys a lot.
Guys.
Yeah.
Clack that.
Counting the cost or whatever. Take one.
Okay.